Some paintings capture beauty, others capture something far darker. Among the countless works of art that adorn walls and museums around the world, few carry the weight of fear and sorrow quite like the Anguished Man. This painting, with its distorted face frozen in a silent scream, is said to be more than just a disturbing image on canvas. It is believed to be alive in its own sinister way, an object that holds within it the suffering of its creator and the echoes of something not entirely human. Hidden away for decades in a quiet home in Cumbria, northern England, the Anguished Man surfaced not as a masterpiece to be admired, but as a mystery to be feared. Those who have stood before it describe an unsettling pull, as though the eyes in the portrait look back with pain and awareness that transcends the boundaries between art and reality. Its rough textures, bleeding shades of red and brown, and hollow expressions seem to whisper of torment long past, leaving an impression that lingers far beyond the moment one turns away. The very air around it feels heavy, thick with an unexplained presence that makes even the bravest visitors uncomfortable. No signature marks the canvas, no record identifies the artist. Only fragments of a chilling story remain. Rumors that the man who painted it mixed his own blood into the oils before taking his own life shortly after the work was finished. Whether fact or legend, that claim alone gives the painting a tragic power, a sense that something of the creator remains trapped within the brushstrokes themselves, forever bound to his final creation. What if a work of art could truly capture more than emotion? What if it could imprison a piece of a soul, holding it captive for eternity? The question lies at the heart of The Anguished Man, a painting that blurs the line between art and the supernatural, between creation and curse, between the living world and whatever lies beyond. The origins of the Anguished Man are cloaked in obscurity, as if the story itself has been swallowed by the darkness that radiates from the painting like a living, breathing entity. No one knows the artist's name, nor the exact year the piece was created. What remains are scattered fragments of memory and rumor, enough to shape the outline of a deeply troubled soul consumed by inner demons. According to the account passed down through the years like a whispered warning, the artist was a reclusive man, plagued by severe depression and mental torment that seemed to grow worse with each passing day. He was said to have lived in near total isolation, consumed by his art and by the inner demons that refused to release their grip on his deteriorating psyche. Those who knew him described a brilliant but unstable individual, someone whose talent was matched only by his profound suffering. It was during one of his final, most desperate periods that he began to work on what would become his last and most haunting painting. Neighbors who caught brief glimpses of him through grimy windows described a man teetering on the edge of sanity, withdrawn and hollow-eyed, as though life itself had already begun to drain from his emaciated frame. His appearance became increasingly gaunt and wild, his behavior more erratic and disturbing. The painting became his obsession, a manifestation of the agony that had long been festering inside him, like an infected wound. He would work on it for hours without break, often through the night, muttering to himself in ways that disturbed anyone who overheard. In a final act of despair or perhaps twisted devotion, he reportedly mixed his own blood with the oil paints, literally binding his life essence to the canvas in a ritual that seemed to blur the boundaries between body and art, between the physical and spiritual realms. When the painting was finally finished, the man's tortured story ended abruptly and tragically. Not long after its completion, he took his own life in circumstances that remain mysteriously unclear to this day. Some say he was found with paintbrush still in hand, others claim he simply vanished, leaving only the painting as evidence of his final, desperate act. The reasons for his suicide remain unknown, but those who later saw the painting couldn't help but feel that it carried the echo of that tragedy, as though his final moments of anguish had been permanently captured and preserved within the very fibers of the canvas. The work eventually fell into the possession of an elderly woman, Sean Robinson's grandmother, who acquired it from a close friend of the deceased artist. To her, It was more than a piece of art. It was a relic of human suffering, a window into madness that should never have been opened. She would later warn her family with increasing urgency that the painting was cursed beyond redemption and should never see the light of day again. Sean Robinson's grandmother had always been a woman of reason and practicality, grounded in simple beliefs and quiet faith, but something about the Anguished Man unsettled her in ways she could never fully explain or rationalize. When the painting first came into her possession decades ago, she briefly admired it, sensing both the undeniable craftsmanship and the raw pain within its tormented strokes. The technical skill was evident, but so was something far more disturbing, an emotional intensity that seemed to reach beyond the canvas itself. Yet, the longer it remained in her home, the heavier the atmosphere seemed to grow, as though the very air around it thickened with an almost palpable sorrow and dread. It was as if the painting was slowly poisoning the environment, infecting everything around it with its dark energy. In the silence of the night, when the house settled into its deepest quiet, faint sounds began to stir from the direction of the room where the painting was kept. She heard soft crying, muffled sobs that would fade as soon as she drew near to investigate, as though whatever was causing them was aware of her approach and deliberately hiding from her presence. Sometimes she would wake in the early hours of the morning to the sound of whispering, urgent, desperate conversations that sat just beyond the edge of comprehension, as though multiple voices were engaged in heated discussion in another world that was somehow overlapping with her own. The whispers seemed to grow more frequent and more intense as time passed, sometimes accompanied by what sounded like footsteps pacing back and forth in empty rooms. On more than one occasion, she swore she saw a dark figure move across the hallway with purposeful intent, though careful investigation always revealed that no one else was there. These weren't vivid dreams or tricks of failing eyesight. They came when she was wide awake and alert, in those tense moments between calm and dread, when the boundary between reality and nightmare becomes dangerously thin. Her fear deepened progressively until she became absolutely convinced that the painting was not merely haunted. It was inhabited by something malevolent and persistent. She believed with growing certainty that the spirit of the artist, consumed by suffering and regret, had bound itself to the canvas through his final desperate act, forever imprisoned within the image he created in his last moments of lucidity. To her, every brushstroke carried the weight of his suffering, and every glance at the painting invited that anguish to spill into the living world like poison from a broken vessel. She warned her family with increasing desperation never to display it, never to bring it out of storage, and above all, never to underestimate what it was capable of unleashing. For her, the Anguished Man was not a work of art. It was a vessel of concentrated pain and malevolence that should remain buried in perpetual darkness. After his grandmother's passing, Sean Robinson found himself methodically sorting through the few possessions she had left behind, each item carrying memories of her long and eventful life. Among the dusty boxes of family photographs, yellowed letters, and cherished keepsakes lay a large, carefully wrapped canvas that had been stored away in the darkest corner of her attic for many years. When he finally uncovered it with trembling hands, he was met with the same distorted face his grandmother had always warned him about with such urgency. The tortured visage from the stories she once told in hushed tones late at night. This was the Anguished Man in all its disturbing glory. He remembered her warnings with crystal clarity, her absolute insistence that it was cursed beyond redemption. But to Sean, who considered himself rational, educated, and thoroughly skeptical of supernatural claims, those tales were nothing more than superstition born from grief, loneliness, and an overactive imagination shaped by years of isolation. At first, his natural curiosity far outweighed any sense of inherited fear or caution. The painting was undeniably strange and deeply unsettling, yes, but it was also fascinating from both an artistic and psychological perspective. Its textures were rough and heavily layered, as if each stroke carried not just paint but physical struggle and emotional weight. The shades of red and brown blended unevenly across the canvas, creating the disturbing illusion of wounds that refused to heal, of pain that had become a permanent part of the composition. The face at the center, mouth stretched wide open in a silent scream of anguish, eyes hollow, yet somehow retaining an almost human consciousness, seemed to convey unbearable pain that transcended the merely physical. Sean found that he couldn't look at it for extended periods without feeling a strange discomfort creeping up his spine, as though the subject's suffering was actively reaching out through the canvas, trying to draw him into its world of eternal torment. Determined to see for himself whether his grandmother's fears had any basis in reality, Sean made the fateful decision to hang the painting in his family home. He placed it deliberately in a spare room that was rarely used, convinced that nothing more dramatic would come of this simple experiment than perhaps some interesting conversations with visitors. At first, the painting was simply an odd, eerie decoration, a curiosity with a grim backstory that made for compelling dinner party conversation. But visitors who saw it often reacted in remarkably similar ways. An involuntary shiver, a moment of uncomfortable silence, an unspoken sense of unease that seemed to settle over them like a cold blanket. Some said the eyes seemed to follow them as they moved around the room. Others described feeling a sudden wave of inexplicable sadness that they couldn't shake for hours afterward. Sean initially dismissed these reactions as psychological suggestion, the power of reputation and storytelling shaping perception in predictable ways. Yet, as the days slowly turned into weeks, that sense of heaviness in the room began to grow more pronounced and undeniable, and his grandmother's warnings, once casually brushed aside as the ramblings of an elderly woman, slowly began to echo in his mind with increasing urgency and disturbing clarity. It started so subtly that Sean almost missed the early warning signs entirely. In the first few nights after the Anguished Man was hung prominently on the wall, Sean would sometimes wake in the deep hours of the night to faint sounds drifting through the house. Soft cries echoing through the hallway like distant memories of pain, so remote and ethereal that he could not be entirely sure if they were real or simply the product of his unconscious mind, processing his grandmother's old stories. The air in the room where the painting hung felt markedly different from the rest of the house, heavier somehow and more oppressive, as though the space itself was actively resisting light and warmth. Even during the brightest daylight hours, the atmosphere in that room remained thick with an inexplicable unease that seemed to seep into the very walls, and his family began to sense this disturbing change as well. His wife mentioned with growing concern that she felt constantly watched whenever she passed by the door, as though invisible eyes were tracking her every movement with malevolent intent. Their young son began to complain frequently about strange noises emanating from that room during the night. Sounds he described as crying, whispering, and occasionally something that sounded disturbingly like laughter. He absolutely refused to enter the room alone, even during daylight hours, claiming that it made him feel sick and scared in ways he couldn't articulate. Soon, the disturbances grew increasingly difficult to ignore or rationalize away. Doors throughout the house began closing on their own, not with dramatic slams that might indicate drafts or settling, but with slow, deliberate motions that felt almost purposeful and intelligent. Shadows seemed to shift and dance in corners where no one stood, moving in ways that defied explanation. The family's normally calm and friendly dog would bark furiously at empty spaces, its fur standing on end in obvious terror before retreating to the farthest corner of the house, whimpering and refusing to be coaxed back. Sean tried desperately to explain everything through logical means. The house settling after temperature changes, drafts of air moving through the old structure, the power of suggestion affecting his family's perceptions. But the incidents continued relentlessly, each one methodically chipping away at his carefully constructed skepticism. In later interviews with paranormal researchers and journalists, Sean described seeing a dark figure appear briefly at the very edge of his peripheral vision, a shape that vanished instantaneously, the moment he turned his head to look directly at it. One particularly memorable night, while sitting alone in the living room reading, he heard what he could only describe as a man's agonized cry, so loud and so filled with genuine suffering that it sent him rushing frantically through every room of the house, only to find each space completely empty and silent. His wife, increasingly shaken by recurring nightmares, featuring a faceless man who seemed to be trying to communicate some urgent message, began pleading with him to remove the painting immediately. The family's hard won peace slowly unraveled as fear systematically replaced curiosity, and what had begun as an interesting experiment gradually transformed into a source of genuine terror that was affecting every member of the household in profound and disturbing ways. Determined to find concrete proof of what was happening in his home, Sean decided to take a more scientific approach to documenting the strange activity that seemed to center around the Anguished Man. He set up several cameras around the room, recording for hours each night in hopes of capturing something tangible that could either prove or disprove the supernatural claims surrounding the painting. What he discovered in those recordings would later make The Anguished Man one of the most infamous haunted paintings on the internet, and would mark the definitive point where simple curiosity transformed into dangerous obsession that would consume years of his life. Sean Robinson's decision to record the increasingly disturbing occurrences in his home was driven by equal parts mounting fear and scientific fascination. He wanted irrefutable evidence, something concrete and objective that could prove whether what he and his family were experiencing night after night was genuinely real or simply the elaborate tricks of minds under stress. Setting up a simple digital camera in the room where the Anguished Man hung like a sentinel, he began filming continuously during the nighttime hours when the activity seemed most pronounced. The first few recordings appeared completely ordinary to the casual observer, but soon, faint sounds began to appear clearly in the background audio, low, mournful cries that seemed to emanate from the painting itself, the subtle creak of movement where no living person stood, and at times, the faint but unmistakable echo of a man's voice that seemed to whisper desperate messages from somewhere beyond the boundaries of normal perception. Shadows drifted across the walls in patterns that defied the steady lighting setup, and objects occasionally shifted just enough to unsettle anyone watching the footage closely. Most disturbing of all were the moments when the camera seemed to capture brief glimpses of human like figures near the painting, shapes that appeared for only seconds before dissolving back into darkness. Sean uploaded these videos to YouTube in 2010, initially expecting little more than casual interest from a few paranormal enthusiasts. Instead, they spread across the internet like wildfire, capturing the imagination of viewers around the world. The channel that had started as a quiet, personal attempt to find answers quickly became the epicenter of heated online debate and international attention. Viewers from dozens of countries watched in fascination and disbelief as the footage circulated rapidly through paranormal forums, social media platforms, and online communities dedicated to the supernatural. The comment sections filled with passionate arguments. Devoted believers absolutely convinced that the Anguished Man was truly cursed and actively haunted, and determined skeptics working tirelessly to debunk every flicker of movement and every unexplained sound. Some viewers claimed they could clearly see full human figures materializing near the painting during specific moments in the footage, while others insisted it was nothing more than clever editing, strategic lighting tricks, or the powerful influence of suggestion working on impressionable minds. The video's unsettling realism and Sean's obvious sincerity drew the serious attention of professional, paranormal investigators, academic researchers, and online detectives from around the world. Several experienced teams reached out to Sean directly, offering to examine the painting in person or to investigate the environment in which it was kept, using sophisticated scientific equipment. Some claimed the footage displayed authentic signs of genuine hauntings, unexplained energy distortions, electromagnetic fluctuations, and clear manifestations of residual emotional trauma somehow embedded in the physical space. Others dismiss the entire phenomenon as an elaborate viral marketing stunt, a carefully crafted product of lighting manipulation and human imagination designed to generate internet fame. Yet, regardless of personal belief systems, no one could deny the strange emotional pull that the painting seemed to hold over anyone who viewed it, even through a computer screen. The more people watched and discussed the videos, the deeper and more complex the mystery grew. The Anguished Man had successfully escaped the confines of one house in northern England and entered the digital age, its alleged haunting now shared with millions of screens around the world, reaching an audience that its original creator could never have imagined. Over time, as The Anguished Man gained unprecedented global attention and media coverage, countless theories emerged from experts and amateurs alike to explain the haunting phenomena surrounding it. The most widely discussed, and for many believers, the most convincing, was the supernatural explanation rooted in ancient beliefs about art and the human soul. According to this compelling theory, the tormented artist who created the painting had poured not only his raw emotions and artistic skill, but his very life essence into the work. By mixing his own blood with the paint in what appeared to be a ritualistic act, he had unknowingly tethered a fragment of his tortured soul directly to the canvas itself. In this supernatural interpretation, the Anguished Man became far more than mere art. It transformed into a spiritual vessel, a prison of consciousness. The spirit of the artist, consumed by unbearable suffering and profound regret, remained bound within the painting for eternity, doomed to relive his pain and anguish while desperately trying to communicate with the living world. Supporters of this theory point to the intense emotional impact of the piece and the consistent pattern of strange phenomena that have followed its creation as compelling evidence that some essential part of the artist never truly departed from his final work. Others, however, approach the entire story through a more rational psychological lens, drawing on established scientific principles and documented psychological phenomena. They argue that the haunting may be less about actual spirits and more about the human mind's well documented tendency to find meaningful patterns where none actually exist. This concept, known scientifically as pareidolia, causes people to perceive familiar shapes, like faces, figures, or meaningful symbols, in essentially random visual information. When this natural cognitive bias is combined with the powerful influence of suggestion and expectation, even the most ordinary and explainable events can seem supernatural and threatening. If someone is told repeatedly that a painting is cursed and dangerous, their brain becomes hypervigilant, interpreting every minor creak of the floor, every flicker of shadow, every unexplained sound as proof of something sinister and otherworldly. The emotional weight of the painting's genuinely disturbing imagery amplifies this psychological effect exponentially, feeding the imagination and reinforcing belief patterns until subjective experience begins to feel like objective reality. Then there are the committed skeptics and debunkers, who insist with equal passion that the entire phenomenon is nothing more than a perfect storm of coincidence, creativity, and human curiosity about the unknown. To them, the haunting of the Anguished Man represents a fascinating example of viral folklore, an internet legend expertly fueled by compelling storytelling, suggestive visual content, and humanity's eternal fascination with fear and the supernatural. They view Sean Robinson's videos not as evidence of paranormal activity, but as either an intentional hoax designed to generate online fame and attention, or as an unintentional experiment demonstrating how easily belief and fear can spread through digital communities in the modern age. Some point to technical explanations for the phenomena, camera artifacts, audio compression issues, environmental factors, or simple coincidences that have been misinterpreted through the lens of expectation and suggestion. Ultimately, this ongoing debate reveals perhaps as much about human psychology and social behavior as it does about the painting itself. Whether the truth lies in supernatural forces or psychological phenomena, the Anguished Man serves as a powerful demonstration of how deeply emotion and imagination can intertwine in the human experience. When art successfully provokes both genuine fear and deep empathy simultaneously, the traditional boundaries between perception and truth become dangerously blurred. And sometimes it's precisely in that ambiguous space where the most profound and lasting mysteries take root and flourish. Throughout recorded history, certain works of art have inexplicably carried an aura of darkness and malevolence, gaining fearsome reputations that blur the traditional boundary between aesthetic beauty and supernatural terror. The Anguished Man is certainly not alone in this disturbing category of allegedly cursed artworks. Another infamous example that has gained international notoriety is The Hands Resist Him, a deeply unsettling 1972 painting by American artist Bill Stoneham that depicts a young boy and a lifeless female doll standing before a glass door, behind which ghostly hands press desperately against the transparent barrier. According to Stoneham himself, the boy represents his 5-year-old self. The door symbolizes the boundary between the conscious world and the realm of dreams and impossibilities, and the doll serves as a guide meant to escort the boy through that threshold. However, viewers and subsequent owners have claimed far more sinister effects. Figures in the painting allegedly move on their own during nighttime hours. Children who view it report disturbing nightmares for weeks afterward, and adults describe feeling inexplicably nauseous or emotionally disturbed after prolonged exposure. There are numerous other examples scattered throughout art history and popular culture. The Crying Boy series by Giovanni Bragolin mass-produced paintings that became notorious in the 1980s when British tabloids reported that they were somehow connected to mysterious house fires. Supposedly, homes containing these paintings would burn down, but the artwork itself would always remain mysteriously undamaged. The portrait of Bernardo de Galvez hanging in a Florida hotel, where guests consistently insist that the subject's eyes follow them down the hallway with an intensity that feels almost malevolent. The Woman in Blue by Thomas Gainsborough, which reportedly caused several viewers to faint and was eventually removed from public display. Each of these works has accumulated its own collection of unexplained incidents, eyewitness accounts, and fervent believers who insist that something genuinely supernatural lurks within the paint and canvas. Across different time periods and cultures, art has often been blamed or revered for awakening strange forces that seem to exist just beyond the boundaries of normal human understanding. This widespread fascination reveals something fundamental and perhaps universal about human nature itself. People are irresistibly drawn to what frightens them, to the unknown mysteries that lie just beyond the comfortable limits of rational explanation. Fear, when safely contained within a frame or story, becomes a psychologically acceptable way to confront the deeper mysteries that exist between life and death, between the known and unknowable. Haunted art, in particular, embodies this complex paradox perfectly. It allows viewers to experience genuine dread and terror while standing before what is ultimately just a static image, to feel the thrilling rush of danger without ever being truly at physical risk. The stories and legends surrounding such paintings often function as psychological mirrors, reflecting not only the documented pain and struggles of their creators, but also the hidden anxieties, fears, and unresolved traumas of those who view them. At the heart of these enduring legends lies a delicate but crucial balance: the thin, often imperceptible line between artistic genius and mental illness, between creative inspiration and psychological breakdown. Many of history's greatest artists have wrestled openly with profound suffering, mental illness, addiction, and emotional trauma, and their pain has often served as the primary fuel for their most powerful and memorable work. The idea that art can somehow absorb, preserve, or even amplify that anguish resonates deeply with viewers across all cultures and backgrounds. When an image is genuinely unsettling or depicts tragic themes, it connects to something primitive and instinctual within human psychology, simultaneously evoking empathy, curiosity, and an almost primal unease that transcends rational analysis. Disturbing imagery wields such profound emotional power precisely because it forces viewers to confront what most people instinctively try to avoid in their daily lives: raw vulnerability, devastating loss, existential fear, and the fundamental fragility of human existence. Paintings like The Anguished Man compel viewers to acknowledge the unfiltered, often brutal truth of human suffering in all its forms. Whether or not these works are literally cursed by supernatural forces becomes almost irrelevant in the face of their psychological impact. What truly matters is their demonstrated ability to reach directly into the human psyche and remind us that beauty and horror, creation and destruction, hope and despair often share the exact same brushstroke, existing in an eternal dance of opposing forces that defines the human condition itself. After years of increasingly intense, unexplained events that were taking a serious toll on his family's mental health and daily life, Sean Robinson finally made the difficult but necessary decision to remove the Anguished Man from his home permanently. The strange sounds that had become a nightly occurrence, the shadowy figures that seemed to lurk just beyond the edge of vision, and the growing atmosphere of tension and fear within his household had become far too much to ignore or rationalize away. What had begun as innocent curiosity and a desire to honor his grandmother's memory had gradually transformed into a source of genuine terror that was affecting every member of his family in profound and disturbing ways. Sean no longer wished to test the limits of whatever presence or energy the painting might contain, whether supernatural or psychological in nature. With great care and obvious reluctance, he wrapped the canvas in protective materials and placed it into secure storage at an undisclosed location, effectively sealing it away from public access indefinitely. His primary and only goal was to ensure that no member of his household would ever have to endure its alleged influence again. The relief that followed its removal was immediate and palpable. The house felt lighter, the family's sleep improved dramatically, and the constant undercurrent of anxiety that had plagued them for months finally began to dissipate. As The Anguished Man gained international fame through online exposure and media coverage, paranormal investigators, academic researchers, and supernatural enthusiasts from around the world began reaching out to Sean regularly, requesting permission to examine the painting in person using various scientific instruments and investigative techniques. Some wanted to conduct electromagnetic field tests, temperature monitoring, and infrared imaging to detect any anomalous energy signatures. Others hoped to organize seances, spiritual readings, or other forms of psychic investigation to attempt communication with whatever entity might be associated with the artwork. Sean declined the vast majority of these requests, remaining understandably wary of potentially provoking or intensifying whatever energy seemed to linger within or around the painting. A few carefully selected groups of experienced investigators were granted extremely limited observation opportunities under strictly controlled conditions, but even these brief encounters reportedly left participants deeply unsettled and emotionally affected. They consistently described experiencing a heavy, almost suffocating atmosphere in the room whenever the painting was unwrapped for examination, as if the air itself became thick and oppressive in its presence. Some reported sudden onset headaches, dizziness, or waves of inexplicable nausea that would begin within minutes of viewing the painting directly. Others described being overwhelmed by a profound sense of sorrow and despair that would linger for hours or even days after leaving the location, as though they had somehow absorbed a portion of the emotional trauma allegedly embedded within the artwork itself. Today, the exact whereabouts and current condition of the Anguished Man remain known only to Sean Robinson and perhaps a small circle of trusted confidants. He has stated clearly in multiple interviews and public statements that the painting is securely stored away in a location far from public reach, climate controlled and properly preserved, and that he has absolutely no intention of ever displaying it publicly again, or allowing it to return to any domestic environment. Whether this decisive action has completely silenced the alleged haunting, or merely contained and concentrated its effects within a smaller space, remains impossible to determine with certainty. The mystery endures, unchallenged by scientific investigation, unresolved by rational explanation, and perhaps undiminished by the passage of time. The story continues to circulate actively throughout online communities, pass between committed skeptics, devoted believers, and the simply curious who are drawn to unsolved mysteries. Each retelling seems to add new layers to the legend, as though the painting's presence and influence persist not only in whatever physical storage location it currently occupies, but also in the collective imagination of everyone who encounters its story through digital media. Hidden away in artificial darkness, it still exists somewhere in the world, silent, waiting, and perhaps still somehow alive in the way that only truly cursed objects can be, biding its time until circumstances allow it to emerge once again into the light of day. In the end, the Anguished Man remains exactly what it has always been since its creation, a profound mystery suspended precariously between the demonstrably real and the purely imagined, between documented fact and embellished legend. Whether one chooses to believe in supernatural explanations or prefers rational psychological interpretations, the painting's story forces a direct confrontation with something far deeper and more unsettling than simple fear of the unknown. It serves as a dark mirror reflecting the anguish of its unknown creator, the inherent fragility of the human mind when faced with inexplicable phenomena, and the strange, often disturbing ways in which human pain and suffering can potentially outlive their original source, echoing through time, memory, and spaces that exist beyond our complete understanding. Perhaps that is precisely what makes the Anguished Man so consistently unsettling to people across all cultures and belief systems. It serves as an uncomfortable reminder that suffering, once given artistic expression and emotional form, may never truly disappear from the world. Instead, it lingers indefinitely in the spaces between what we know and what we fear, echoing through the generations like a whispered warning, waiting patiently in the shadows for the next curious soul to gaze too long into its painted depths and wonder with growing unease exactly what is staring back from within that tortured, eternal scream. But the question remains, can darkness be trapped only in art? Or can it also be built into the very foundations of belief itself? In the next chapter of our journey, we turn our eyes toward a structure surrounded by its own aura of secrecy and symbolism, one that stands at the crossroads of faith, ritual, and mystery. Join me as we explore the hidden world of the Mormon temple, where stories of sacred power and forbidden knowledge blur the line between devotion and the unknown.